a massive influx of resources, people, investments could also mean the end to indigenous culture or much which makes these areas quite special.
Carl Gustaf, the Arctic Investment Protocol, it was announced at Davos. You know, there was Leonardo DiCaprio heralding that enough is enough, you know better, the world knows better. But these guidelines are voluntary at present. I mean, what do you think? Is it more than just a gesture this time round?
Well, I think we all feel that there's a lot happening in the Arctic. The shipping routes are opening up, particularly the Northeast Passage across Russia. There's a lot of movement, I think, right now to find ways of making money in the Arctic. However, with the low oil and gas prices, I think there's been a certain break on some of this. So these guidelines come in some ways in an inopportune moment because a lot of the surge we saw in investments is actually now drying up. However, I think it's really important to try to see how do we develop this area. I think most of us have this idea that the Arctic is still pristine. In some ways it's more intact than many other parts of the globe. But in fact, already we see some quite significant environmental damages. For example, plastics seem to be accumulating a lot in the Arctic right now because they get captured by the currents and brought up. And so we have a somewhat problematic situation also in that new industries will add new problems to the Arctic. Now these guidelines, the way they were designed is really to tell the industry a little bit how to behave. But they're classical in the sense of don't do any damage, but they're not really looking at net positive. How can we do something that's really positive for the Arctic? How can we enhance and improve the livelihoods, but also maintain the quality of the environment?
Okay, now if we look at, for example, the reaction to it, Guggenheim Partners quickly endorsed the protocol, saying that the Arctic represents one of the last greatest economic frontiers. Do you agree? What are we talking about in terms of potential here?
Well, it's not surprising that they endorsed it. They were sort of behind it, so that would be expected. But I think the fact that we are talking about new prospects in the Arctic is not surprising. In fact, in terms of human activities, this is one of the areas that's been relatively untouched so far. And there are, of course, a number of resources out there. However, it's also a very fragile environment and one that needs a lot of special care. My view is that these guidelines, the Arctic Investment Protocol, is not quite as far going as they could be. In fact, they're also a little bit, they have a little bit less legitimacy than they could have had they been involving more people with an environment background or more a community background or people from the region as well. So our sense is, they're okay, but a lot more work needs to be done. And of course, we need the legitimacy of all the countries that are operating in the Arctic, notably Russia, which of course is the largest part of the Arctic.
Indeed. I mean, I did read a few articles about this, and it said that people in the north, people in the Arctic, they are wanting development or economic development just as much as everywhere else wants it. However, as human beings, as business, etc., our track record of marrying business, marrying these potential, this economic frontier, as it were, and also maintaining the environment respectfully, we don't have a very good track record. Do you think it can be different this time?
Well, I think one of the big things we had come out of the Macondo spill, the Deepwater Horizon accident, was that even large oil and gas companies can fail. And in fact, their whole legitimacy is based on the fact that they behave like good corporate citizens and good citizens in general. And I think that's had hit home now to the oil and gas industry. So they're really paring back their investments because they sense, okay, the risks far outweigh the potential profits. In other sectors, maybe the calculus is still there. In terms of fishing, for example, we're now seeing migration of a number of fish stocks further to the poles. So that, I think, will in some ways mean that there'll be attractive opportunities. So areas that were previously ice covered and, of course, in some ways outside of the fishing zone are now opening up. So there are winners and losers in some ways. Now, when it comes to Arctic communities, I think a lot of the people living there actually are very proud of their lifestyles, and they don't necessarily want to change that. A massive influx of resources, people, investments could also mean the end to indigenous culture or much which makes these areas quite special. So I think we need to be quite sensitive in terms of how we see these developments. I think further developments of rules and guides for the Arctic will require much more thinking with these communities, working together with people who are into nature conservation, nature protection and management.
It definitely needs the right brains to kind of deal with the situation. But it sounds like something to keep an eye on as the year unfolds. But thank you so much, Carl Gustaf, for coming in today and telling us your insights about it. Thank you.
Thank you, my pleasure.
Okay, well that's all from Carl Gustaf and myself for the moment. But as always, there is much more coming up on Dukascopy TV, so don't miss out. Goodbye for now.